everybody. I am super excited to join you all today. We'll get started here. My overall goal today, whether you're an athlete, a musician, an educator, all of the above, anywhere in between, my goal today is to leave you guys with something new you've learned or maybe that you can apply in your everyday life. Right. So first, we're going to start with a little story, a once upon a time, if you will. And this may or may not be about me. But introduction to myself, Elizabeth Hinley. You could call me Liz. I grew up in a northern Illinois suburb of Chicago. And like most kids there, we had nothing but cornfields and soccer fields. So I started my athletic career with kitty kicker soccer, chasing a ball around, pretending like I knew what I was doing. Also participating in figure skating as well as basketball. So getting a well-rounded sense of athletics. Around this time is where I got into middle school and we were introduced into music and we had a choice of our instruments. And I already knew exactly what I wanted to do, and that was percussion. And my parents, as great parents as they are, they made sure that was the instrument I wanted. Are you sure percussion? Of course. And don't you worry, my choir folks, I participated in choir as well and getting into drama club. And let's be honest, if you didn't do Wizard of Oz, we need to check your program. Once I got into high school, really followed the passion that I built with music, really getting into more instruments, learning around the world, as well as getting into performances. But then continuing with drama club and doing a lot with the orchestra pit as well, landing a spot in the Illinois State performance of Hairspray during my time in the orchestra pit. Still participating in sports where my science teacher encouraged me to participate in cross country. And then later in my high school career, participated in track and field where I threw discus and landed a spot at the state Illinois championship. In college, I knew I wanted to continue with my music education. So I went to the University of North Texas and began my percussion performance degree in music. And once again, rinse and repeat, learning as many instruments as I can and really deepening my studies there. And I knew for sure once I got into college, I wanted to continue my athletics, but I got really interested in the sport of triathlon. And triathlon involves a swim, a bike, and a run. So once again, we're kind of getting well-rounded with a variety of different sports, a variety of different instruments. And being able to apply it across all my skills and leadership roles that I was getting into. During this time, I was able to land a spot in the age group division on the national team for a couple different world championships. And this was also when I got really passionate in coaching as a profession. So I earned my level 2 certification with USA Triathlon, level 2 certification with USMS, United States Master Swim, as well as a yoga certification, getting a little deeper into the mind and body practices. That's when I wrapped up my education and earning my Bachelor of Arts degree at the University of North Texas and thought, well, coaching has been really solid for me and I've been really interested in the profession. So I went back to school at the UNT and earned my Master's of Science degree in kinesiology with a concentration in exercise and sports psychology. And this is where I conducted a meta-analysis on how music affects athletic performance or sport. And that's really where a lot of what we're going to learn today is where I started my passion in this field. Right at the near end of my master's degree, a program called the Next Olympic Hopeful from the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee sent out this recruitment program where I was introduced in the sport of rowing. And if I had to pick any sport that was more musically demanding over any other, rowing was definitely one and really hit it off pretty well. And once I got into what's called coastal rowing, so taking an open water shell and going to any open body water, I found my spot, I found my stride, landed a spot on the national team and continue to represent Team USA around the world. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm super excited to share my passion of both music and sport and how we can combine the two together and what we can learn from both to benefit whether we're in one area of craft or both. We're going to break up this presentation today by first diving into the research, taking a look at what has been studied as far as music benefiting our athletic lives, and also learning a little bit of what the athletics can teach us for our musical lives. We'll take little breaks in between each section that we'll learn for a cadenza, for a solo, with a couple examples. And then at the end, we'll repeat with a quick summary and wrap it up all nice and pretty for you. So, couple nitpicks I would like to break down as far as the research goes. Anything that we'll talk about with the music aspect will involve playing an instrument or listening, primarily listening to music. So things that involve music therapy will be excluded from these research studies, as it's a very particular form or particular participant, as well as writing and composing, as they do not have any research. So if you're looking for a thesis or something to look into, you're welcome to check out writing and composing involved with music. And pretty similar with sport, we'll look at team and individual sports, but excluding research studies that have been done specifically for physical therapy or occupational therapies, and anything that we would consider leisure fitness, so such as gardening. So more specifically towards a competitive type of sport or things that are more have that sort of regimen to it. In terms of the music, how the music was selected was either by the participants themselves, the experimenter, or using a rating scale or questionnaire of some sort. So one in particular was called the Intrinsic Motivation Inventory, or the IMI. This one, as it says motivation, is particularly looking at how motivating the music soundtrack is, and also how motivating the participants are in doing the task, in this case, the sport or exercise. Also, very common questionnaire that was used in a lot of these studies was called the Brunel Music Rating Inventory. Note that it says 2. So right now there are 3 because it keeps updating the more that the studies are being done. But this one looks more at how motivating, interesting, stimulative or sedative, so more information of how the participant interacts with the music, and then vice versa. So if we're able to take that music and put it into other contexts for sport, we can refer to this questionnaire. And I know you're wondering, and hopefully you're wondering, I definitely was wondering how the genres of music played a role, as there are tons, and especially with how many subgenres we have nowadays. And what's really exciting is that we covered quite a bit. There's a lot of different genres that were involved in these studies. And of course, comparing it to either no music or no sound control group, or even a metronome or a white noise type of control group. And the last little bit is the questionnaires that are heavily tied to the questionnaires of the music selection involve things like mood, feeling scales, how motivated or concentrating the participants were on the task, and overall enjoyment. And that primary scale was the Brunel Mood Scale, or BRUMS. And it looked primarily at these 6 different mood categories. And probably out of these 6, we're going to have vigor and fatigue, levels of fatigue, that were scaled or had the most impact regarding listening to music during an exercise. All right. The question is, we want to have this high quality of performance. If that's the goal, how can we get that optimal level? And my goal today then is to introduce these ideas to help us get to that optimal level, whether we are getting ready for a game, a concert, a performance of some sort. And what we're going to be looking at is what's called arousal level. And we want to have a certain level of arousal that is very subjective to an individual or to a group. So in contexts like a team, so that you don't want to have it too low so that you're bored or apathetic, but also not too high where a lot of things like anxiety comes into play. So hopefully if we find the tools that we need, we find that optimal level. The first place that we're going to dive right into is the most complicated part of the whole body. Why not, right? Diving right into the brain and looking at things like the perception of exertion is where we're going to start in relative to the brain. So when we're doing a task or an exercise, we have what's called a perceived rating of exertion. So how hard or how easy something is. And our good old friend here, Borg, developed these scales where we were able to rate our efforts in these contexts. His most popular scale is 6 to 20, but you may also see like a 1 to 10 scale, like at a doctor's office. How you feeling today on a scale of 1 to 10, right? That's Borg. So on a scale of 6 to 20 was the most used scale during our research studies, where 6 is our no exertion, feeling pretty good. You can do this all day long. I'm super happy and comfortable. Whereas 20 is the maximal exertion, where you can only do it for so long, maybe a couple seconds. It is your absolute peak of what you can accomplish. And then anywhere in between that we're rating these performances or exercises. So when applying with these scales, the question is, how would you like to feel on your day of performance? Would you like to feel like the guy on the left or the guy on the right? Feel it out, feel it out. Well, may I say, it's probably the guy on the left, right? We want to feel a little bit more enjoyment as we're doing some sort of level of exertion, a sport or performance. So, how can music benefit us to get us into that more happy state as opposed to the poor guy on the right? When listening to music during an exercise or sport, RPE decreases, meaning our perception of our exertion of doing that task feels easier when listening to music compared to not. When doing workloads or exercises that are more consistent versus maximal, so like near that 20, the cross-eyed, frowny face, right? Exercise that are more consistent have a greater effect when listening to music compared to not. Now, consistent workloads are more like endurance type sports, or if you're doing intervals of an exercise that are sub-maximal. So they're consistent to each other versus getting progressively harder, for example. We also have looking at the impact of the music selection, that if you have your self-selected or your preferred music, it'll have the greater impact on your performance positively compared to if somebody else selected the music for you. So the more that you picked it, that you enjoy it, the bigger the impact. And lastly, music that is rated, remembering the motivational rating inventory. So music that is rated motivational to you as the individual will have the greatest impact versus odetrous, and then certainly versus no music. Odetrous means the music is not motivating, but also not motivating. It's just sound that's pleasant. It's there. And then certainly odetrous, having some sort of music compared to no music will have a greater impact than compared to the control group of no music. So how do we apply this? Let's have our little solo example with our good old friend, Mr. Phelps. So Phelps, if he were to select music to help him during his training sessions, during his prime time, of course, he's retired now, but first thing he would do is select his music that is motivational to him. He can use those questionnaires to help him narrow things down if needed, but just if anything else, making sure that the music is what you prefer to listen to. Play that soundtrack or play the music during sub-maximal practice sessions. You certainly can play music during your maximal sessions. It just won't be as impactful or beneficial in terms of what music can provide us with that RPE benefit. So, using like our Borg scale of 6 to 20, anywhere between 6 to 15 could be fair game to have that positive impact. And then enjoy. Let the results resolve itself. That RPE will drop, things start to feel pretty easy or feel strong and consistent during your practice sessions. What with one study that Yamashita did with his colleagues, he coined the phrase distraction effect. Now, distraction effect, you can develop this theory where if we're listening to music, there's this sense of distraction from the task that you're doing, which then can result to our RPE feeling like we're doing the task more easily. It's easier to do because there's a distraction, right? So that theory can be tied over to endurance type sports. So if we were to use cycling as an example, and we were to try to get as far as we can without listening to anything or any music, let's say we can only get so far. But if we were to cycle with music, the theory is that we can get much farther, right? With this distraction effect in place, we can lengthen our time of physical effort. Now, disclaimer, I'm not encouraging you to listen to music, especially if you're cycling on open roads. So be sure to hear traffic safely for safety. Okay, thank you. So let's apply this. Now, as us, as musicians, it's also important to have a level of endurance too. If we know that music can boost our endurance sport, having an endurance for us, especially if we have those multi-hour rehearsals or concerts, we can use athletics to develop our endurance too. So first thing to do is select the sport to help build that endurance. One, for example, is running. And I selected running here as the example, as that is probably the most accessible sport across the world. Just grab a pair of shoes and head out the door, right? But any sort of sport that has a consistency to it or repeatability, meaning that you can do it consistently throughout your schedule. You could come back to that same stimuli on a regular basis. Also with how the sport is cyclic or consistent in itself. So such as running, it's the same pattern to do the sport, cycling, swimming, cross-country skiing, right? All of these are great examples. That can help us with already building our endurance, both physically and then mental focus too. Starting out though, let's say you're coming from like a couch position, getting into athletics or getting into an endurance atmosphere, I like to use what's called chunky peanut butter to smooth peanut butter. Now, start in chunks. Let's say I can do 5 minutes where it's challenging for me to do, but I can do it. Start with 5 minutes, take a break, and then do another 5 minutes. So we've got our two chunks of 5 minutes. You could do this by distance or you could do it by duration. So here I have the example of the duration of 5 minutes. And then slowly build it, your rest time in between the chunks so that it comes to our smooth peanut butter of a 10-minute bout of exercise, for example. Of course, it's all dependent on what you need or what the goal is, but you can use that as chunks building into our smooth, consistent endurance effort. And then, like we learned, if you need that little boost, pop on some music that you prefer and has some sort of motivational factor, and it can really encourage the mind and body to go that much farther building your endurance. All right, we talked about the long, but what about the short? For something like strength and conditioning or a sport like weightlifting, is there a benefit to listening to music for exercises such as this? Why, yes, of course there is. I'm excited to say. One of the biggest impacts that music has relative to sports such as weightlifting is that our overall mood states improve. So things like vigor and decreasing fatigue, senses of fatigue, so like our RPE, improve when listening to music. And one particular study have found that exercises that are more explosive, such as if you were to jump vertically as high as you can, called vertical jump, the performance of that vertical jump improved when listening to music. So, in other words, the participants were able to jump higher with music than without. And in terms of strength and conditioning or weightlifting programs for us as musicians, it's a lot of what the common doctor's office, you're building our strength, balancing our musculature, building our bone density, especially as we get older, as it's natural to lose bone density. Strength and conditioning certainly helps with that. Probably our number one, I put a big star next to that, is injury prevention. And quite a few musicians underestimate the impact programs such as strength and conditioning can do. You know, a lot of wear and tear in the forearms, a lot of violinists, for example, since the position isn't quite natural, and over time, that wear and tear can cause a lot of injuries. Strength and conditioning can help either reverse that or prevent that. And let's be honest, of course, I had to put this in here. If you're performing any of Wagner's operas, let alone the Valkyries, you're going to want to be in a strength and conditioning program. And for those that may not know, Wagner is a well known composer, and his opera performances tend to be very physically taxing. So, being in a program such as strength and conditioning, weight training, can really help with you performing on the stage. All right, last little bit, good old ticker here, our thumb thumb, the important muscle. If anything, this is the muscles that we want to make sure is good. And when listening to music, is there an effect on with our heart rate when listening compared to not listening to music? And just like everything else, yes, there is. That when listening to music that is what we would call soothing, has a slower tempo, so it's calming, relaxing, the heart rate does decrease. Of course, on the flip side, you guessed it, if you're listening to stimulative, exciting kind of music, faster tempo music, the heart rate increases. Now, in terms of how much our heart rate increases or decreases listening to certain ratings of music, whether it's soothing compared to stimulative, it could be a very small range or quite impactful. So it all depends on the individual and certainly what you're trying to do in terms of maybe getting ready for an exercise or getting out of an exercise. And of course, that was my beautiful segue into our next section. That if we're looking at our phases before and after our exercise or sport, or even our performance as a musician on stage, we have a warm up and a cool down phase that is important to do. When listening to music, and let's say we're going to talk about the athlete here, during our warm up phase, our prefrontal cortex, so PFC, is activated. So this means when you're listening to music, there is a signal to the brain, the prefrontal cortex, saying, I'm getting ready to do this thing. There's a preparation stimulus. And there's an increase in arousal. So if you remember our graph and our arousal level, if we're more on that boredom, apathetic side, listening to music that is stimulative can help increase the arousal level towards that optimal space. And particularly soundtracks that have a quicker tempo. So one particular study, there was an example of 134 beat per minute for their stimulative soundtrack. So pretty cooking, right? It's a good beat. It's a big, pretty good groove. On the flip side, selecting music that is more sedative will get us into the parasympathetic system. So really quick, sympathetic, you might have heard as the fight or flight response. And then parasympathetic is rest and recovery response. So when listening to calming, soothing, sedative music, there's an increase in that rest and recovery system for our bodies and mind to start recovering. There's a calming emotional effect. So, looking at our emotional cues and our overall mood states when listening to soothing music, there's that calming effect, soothing down, calming down, and particularly soundtracks that have a slower tempo. So we have that 90 beats per minute as the example of that study that had the 134 beats per minute as their stimulative example. So this one was 90. With our example here, we're going to bring back our friend, Mr. Phelps. He's getting ready for his competition, his performance. So what is he going to select to help him get ready for his race? He's going to select, make sure that he is preferred. It is his choice. It is exciting, so has a high motivational factor, and has 120 beats per minute or faster tempo. Where 120 came from was a meta-analysis looking at a lot of musical examples. And they found overall there tends to be a more impactful stimulus with 120 or higher as a stimulating soundtrack. And then kind of using 100 or slower as the more sedative. Now, note that I say or here. So if we remember that we're looking at this optimal level, if we are already at that higher anxiety side of our arousal level, maybe we want to listen to a calming, sedative type of soundtrack to get us back into that optimal level to improve our chances of a higher performance quality. And then combining it with our normal routine of warming up our minds and bodies for the physical exercise that you're going to do. Mr. Phelps won. Woo, congratulations. We're done with the race. What does he do as part of his cool down routine? And maybe using music to help him boost that. Selecting music that he prefers and that has that calming stimuli, that sedative stimuli. So 100 beats per minute or slower too. And a lot of this is subjective. So that's where those questionnaires could come in handy as well. And then combining it with your normal routine of cool down, such as stretching, or even combining it with calming breaths, slowing down the heart rate can really help us get into that rest and recovery phase. Now, as musicians, looking on the flip side, what can athletics help to build up or warm up and cool down as musicians getting ready and coming out of a performance? And there's a lot of similar patterns, but these are kind of the main focuses that I like to introduce, where there's this neuromuscular stimulation. So meaning our muscles to our nerves to our brain becomes activated and gets ready for what we're about to do. Ranges of motion. So if you do have your opera performance in Wagner, if you do have, an instrument like drum set that you have a lot of movement going on, you want to make sure that your joints are moving pretty well. They're well oiled. Muscle patterning. So making sure that you're warming up the muscles, getting used to the pattern that you are doing to play your instrument. So using our violin, for example, our right arm is getting ready for the bow and our left digits or our left fingers are warmed up well for hitting the notes on the strings. And probably most importantly here is getting our mindset focused on the task that you're about to do. So eliminating distractions and getting ready for what's coming next. On the flip side, sun to moon, getting into our parasympathetic system to already start our rest and recovery. A lot of the cool down strategies used in sport can definitely benefit us as musicians. There's a release of muscular tension. So especially if there was a stressful performance, for example, and certainly stress likes to reside in our neck and shoulders, we can do exercises to help release that tension, which will help us get into that rest and recovery phase. And then getting out of the task release. So our minds being able to separate ourselves from what happened so that we can look forward to the future and move on from the task that we just completed. For our example, we'll start with our warm up. We're getting ready for a performance, going onto stage. First thing is to warm up the physical body. It's pretty easy to kind of get this thing going, especially the mind likes to follow what our physical habits tend to be. So if our body is ready, our mind tends to get ready too. So some examples is if you need to get that stimulation, so like that neuromuscular stimulation, doing something like jumping jacks can kind of help us get into that higher arousal level. Looking for ranges of motion, upper body we can use with called around the world. You can grab a resistance band and bringing it over and back across our body, opening up the shoulders, the chest, the torso, and getting some blood flow around that area. And on the flip side, that range of motion for the lower body, you can use an example of leg swings, getting into the hips, the musculature down the leg, and making sure that all of that is moving as opposed to being stiff and tense. Now, note that these are all examples. Put specific exercises that you would need to help get ready for your instrument, for a certain performance, what helps you get to that optimal performance level, that quality, put them here. We know we need to warm up our instrument ourselves, putting it here too. And this will definitely tie into that task focus. So let's say we already started with our dynamic body warm up, and it's starting to help us get our mind focused on what's next. And now doing our instrument specific warm ups, not only warm up the instrument itself, but also going to help bring our minds to focus on this is the instrument I'm playing, this is the task I'm about to do. And something like muscle patterning, I'm going to add this in here. And yes, I'm a percussionist, so using our example as a drummer here, that if I'm looking to warm up my wrists, my fingers, especially if they tend to get cold when I'm nervous, we can use something similar to that pattern of playing with my sticks, such as throwing a ball, to help at least keep the blood flow going and quite literally warming up my fingers. And borrowing a lot of this is from the athletic world. Of course, again, this is an example. Put X example here that is more beneficial to what you need for your specific instrument or what you're about to perform. And then respond with what's needed. Responding is more activating, you're acting upon what you need to perform. And you can use things such as the superhero stance, which focuses on the overall mindset. I like the superhero stance a lot because you quite literally just stand like a superhero and you're telling the mind and the body, like, I got this. This is my space. I know what to do and I'm going to save the world, right? It's getting you into that confidence space. Using things like breath exercises. So a lot, you can use from the world of yoga, but even something like the box exercise is probably the most common. You may have heard of it before, where you're holding your breath, inhale, holding your breath, exhale, all in the same count. This brings us a lot of control over our breath and is certainly bringing our mind on a certain task that we're doing, in this case, our breath. And honestly, our breath is really cool. That right now, believe it or not, you're breathing and you don't have to do anything about it, right? But we can also change our breath. We have the ability to change our breath, and our mental state and our physical state can respond to that too. So we can use whether we need a stimulating type of breath or cooling, calming breath. We can do this here as needed. And then if you really do need that stimulation and activation, whether it's physical and or mental, literally doing something that's short and explosive will really spike things up for you. So as an example, of course. And then really quick, our example for our cool down. We're done with the performance. Round of applause. It was beautiful. Yes, we should cool down, not just our instruments, but our mind and bodies as well. And one of the most welcome, accessible ways to start bringing us out of that high stimulative task is literally walk it out. Just take your time, walk it out slowly, anywhere that you have space. This will help drop the heart rate, leveling out our blood pressure, especially if it was, like I said, a quite stimulating performance, for example, maybe the largest audience you've ever been in front of. Literally walking it out can help a lot with that. Following our normal instrument cleanup. So, yes, as you're spinning your French horn out to get all the spit out, there's also a signal happening to your brain saying, I am done with this task. I'm cleaning up everything I need and closing it for the day. And that helps us get into the space of rest and recovery, both physically and mentally, too. And then releasing any sort of tension. Specifically, here we're going to look at with physically, certainly any tensions, so like stress that we're holding in our heads. But bringing back good old breath work, one that works really well is a 1-to-2 ratio breath, where you're focusing on the exhale. Exhales have a lot of relaxing and has an impact on our heart rate to slow down versus an inhale. But of course, this is an example. You can put the box breath here too, if that feels more comfortable. And then doing something, for example, like the progressive muscle relaxation, where we're looking at different parts of the body and you're focusing on that one area and where you're going to tighten and tense up that spot and then quite literally release it. And this will help release that tension that anywhere that you might have it on your body. And then certainly the mind will follow. For another good example too, as opposed to just squeezing that spot and releasing, a good practice with, and this was introduced in yoga as well, is doing visualization practice, where you can sit, lay down, and you're visualizing your inhale towards the spot that is tense. And then your exhale is releasing that tension and doing it with your breath. So that has that visualization benefit. So we're answering the question of how can I have the highest quality of performance using all these tools that we've learned to find that optimal level of arousal. Do I need more stimulus to get out of that apathetic space? Or do I have already too much stimulus? So I'm more anxious and I need to calm things down to find that optimal level. So we want to make sure that we pick our music, the one that you prefer, the one that's special to you, whether it's motivational or soothing, sedative, or stimulative. The more that you have control over that selection, the more impactful it will be. Use the tools that you need to get ready for your performance. And this could be a performance that is a concert or your everyday getting in front of your instructor practice session. It could be in front of your coach, or it can be the big game, right? Using all these tools and adjusting them to what you specifically need to get ready to do the thing and to cool down and relax after. And certainly mix it up. And not even just within each craft, sport and music, but intermixing the two together. I know for sure, as I mentioned with rowing, tends to be quite rhythmically inclined. And using a lot of what I learned during my percussive studies, transferring it into the boat, my performance has skyrocketed. And I know for sure landing a spot in the national team was in credit to that. And I've learned a ton from the intentional practices of getting ready for a competition that I can use towards a performance in my musical studies or my musical performances. And of course, I cannot talk to athletes and musicians without mentioning this word, that the more you practice this, the more impactful it will be. So whether it's a small little adjustment to your warm-up routine, the more that you do it, the more that your mind and body will follow suit and you're prepared for your next adventure. Thank you all so much. Hopefully, we learned a bunch today, and this I'll open back up to any questions that you may have. And I'm all ears.
Thank you so much. We have kind of an overarching theme that's been coming up through the comments through your whole presentation. And that is this kind of battle that happens particularly for teachers who are finding their students pulled out of their programs by sports, whether that's
Mm.
inflexible schedules from the sports teams or just not finding as much value in it because it's a community choir and their community sports teams are taking priority. So I'm wondering, with all of your knowledge about how beneficial it is to do both, if you have any suggestions for how a music teacher might be able to encourage their students to stick with both or work with the coaches to encourage that balance.
Yes, fantastic question. And it's really tricky, especially here in America, as an example, where we are very interested in specialization. So it's that one thing, and we should spend all our time dedicated to it. But there are quite a few research studies too, so you can probably introduce this to the coaches, that the more well-rounded the athlete is, so not even just in their sport, but other sports and other crafts, you can argue, such as music, can improve the individual in itself. And so you're just encouraging the well-rounded individual. And I'll certainly add to that, with you using sport as like the main, for example. So it's the a student athlete that wants to continue with music. You want to have um, more options available in sense of identity. And we definitely see this a lot with like Olympians that are done with their sport, they're retired. Since that's all they've done, they lose this sense of identity because they don't know what to do anymore. So being able to participate in multiple things keeps ourselves tied to multiple identities so that we're not completely lost. So there's certainly a high benefit long term, not even just for students during their growing years, that when participating in both, you can argue like, no, this is important, because then they have something else they can look forward to if that one thing isn't available anymore.
Thank you for that insight. That's, I think, super helpful and relevant to everyone who's here in the audience. We've had a lot of discussion around taking your suggestions for warm-ups and cool downs and then translating that into their classroom and helping students leave on a much calmer note than if they had just come out of that really exciting song that they love to sing. And so I think that this has been great. I appreciate your time today.